What do you do when the model companies don't produce a scale replica of a race car you think looks really good? You make your own. Could you turn this into this, the 2020 Bathurst Wildcard from Gary Rogers Motorsport? When doing a conversion, or a Code 3 as the diecast collectors call it, you need a donor model and you need decals. And you also need paint, tools and patience. My donor was the Brad Jones Racing ZB Commodore from the Sandown 500. This one's a 43rd scale diecast model by Bianti, but Classic Collectibles and Authentic Collectibles have also done ZBs in this scale. For decals, I went to Paddo's Place. The quality is nothing like what comes on the model from the Bianti factory, but Paddo's does have a huge range to select from and can print them in various scales. So if you wanted to do this conversion in 1/64 or 1/18th, not a problem. But what will be a problem is the fit. More on that shortly. First step is disassembly. On the Biantis, 2 screws hold the thing together, but they're hidden. One is under the front splitter floor and the other is under this rear cover, both of which need to be carefully levered off the model first. Some of the pieces are difficult to remove and I ended up snapping the window insert, but luckily it didn't crack through any of the viewable areas. Removing the paint and cleaning up the casting is next. I just use regular paint stripper applied with a brush. You can see here I was stripping 2 cars at the same time. The Red Bull is a Classic Collectibles model and the subject of a different project. So if you want to see what that turns into, subscribe to the channel. A wire brush and running water take the blistered paint off, and the outside of the shells are then lightly sanded ready for primer. Just a point of note, this paint stripper cannot be used on plastic parts, so the side skirts and rear wing had to be sanded by hand. Painting was pretty straightforward, a single coat of Tamiya grey primer, followed by Tamiya white primer, then pure white. 2 light coats, then a heavier one to finish it off. Bianti include interior decoration, so that also needed to be stripped out or painted over. Other than that, there was no extra work needed on the chassis module. The team initially launched this car with white wheels, but all of the on-track photos that I've found, it's either got black or the natural aluminium finish. I just went with the metal colour that was already on the donor model, but there's certainly good reason to build this with any of those 3 options. Now, the decals. They're printed on a single sheet of really thin, clear decal film, but this one includes the grille, the lights, and strangely, all the panel lines. I was of the understanding Paddo's decals were made for slot car bodies, but I've since been told that some are taken from the digital skin files from racing simulation games, which helps explain the panel lines, which, by the way, mostly don't align with those on the model. So a bit of planning is needed to work around the fitting issues. I print a scan of the decal sheet and use that to see how things line up and work out where I need to cut. It's then time to work with the actual decal and applying things piece by piece to the model. The roof decal went down really well, but the big side decals took some work, lots of softener and careful stretching to get it over the bumps. I found that cutting small slits for the door handles allowed the decal to conform much more neatly, and the exposed bits were then touched up with paint later on. And these blotch bits like this were touched up by hand later in the build. And yes, that's a panel line in the decal going right through the door handle. That's not water on the bonnet, that's Microset, used to help the decal adhere to the paint surface. I also used Microsol where needed, such as when they have to go around tight curves, such as the door handles, vents and so on. But be aware that the Mr. Marksofter brand I usually use on my Tamiya kit builds wrecks Paddo's decals, but this stuff from Microscale seems okay. Here's an experiment that failed. The lower section of the rear wing is carbon fibre on the race car, so I sprayed semi-gloss black onto clear decal film, cut it out and applied it to the part. Everything was going fine until I checked it the next day and found all of these cracks had appeared. I fixed it with a piece of carbon fibre decal over the top, which basically just hid the problem, but it's a bit out of scale and therefore a little overkill, but it looks okay from a distance. The sponsorship on the wing itself had to be trimmed. The decal was just too long and I had to even remove space from between the words to make it fit. More problems with the side windows. The aftermarket signage is overall just too big. These series logos had to come off to make way for the race number. By small miracle, I was lucky enough to preserve them by carefully peeling them off and then reapplying them onto the smaller rear section after those areas had been brush painted with a custom mix of light blue to match the light blue in the decals. I decided to go with the driver names despite them being way oversized, and that meant I had to forgo the logos on the B-pillar. Custom paint mixes were used to fill in any gaps in and around the decal edges to give the decoration a more uniform look once everything was back together. After drying for a few days, all the body parts are cleared to give the decals a gloss finish and to protect them. I used Mr. Hobby Top Coat Premium, decanted and run through the airbrush with a little self-leveling thinner. 4 coats all up, 2 light ones, then 2 heavier. There's no sanding or polishing the clear coat on this one. It came out of the airbrush pretty good and I was a bit scared of damaging those decals. Finally, it's on to reassembly. I use Crystal Clear to glue all the pieces back on, starting with the front and rear windscreen inserts, then the light assemblies, which are made up of a couple of pieces each corner, and the grille and the side glass. The chassis has to be refitted before the side skirts can go on. The rear wing and the camera pods, etc. I fitted those last, mainly because they're just too easy to damage when you're doing other work and handling the model. Then, to try and inject a little more realism, I detailed the exhaust outlet, painted the chrome trim and the grille, and put some wash on the wheel nuts just to give the rims a bit more depth. Despite the shortcomings of the decals, I reckon the completed model looks really sharp, but this conversion had to be a full restrip, repaint and rebuild. Simply throwing some paint and decals over the existing decoration, and I know some Code 3ers who do that, it just wouldn't have done it justice. Another conversion I've done is this awesome looking Holden Racing Team test car which needed 2 donor models to make it accurate. You can check out that build here.